Now we're getting into the tier 1 selections. All right. And some of you may be asking, why is ISA and Delta put together? So for anybody who doesn't know, that ISA was created afterwards, after the Iran hostage crisis failure, Operation Equal Claw. And one of the reasons why it was created is because we saw that we had a capability gap because the military had a horrible relationship with the CIA and wouldn't cooperate. So the Army decided to create its own version of the CIA, which is essentially the ISA. But the ISA is now amalgamation of sort of like the CIA, the NSA, DIA. Pretty much every intelligence discipline is performed by operators within the ISA. So Delta sort of started its selection process, its OTC, and learned that from the British SAS, because that's where Colonel Jerry Beckwith. Well, ISA saw Delta, and the creator of ISA was a man named Colonel Jerry King. And Colonel Jerry King decided to clone almost everything off of Delta, to include the unit structure, which obviously collides squadrons and troops, but they also cloned selection. Their selection is located in a different part of the country. It's in a different landscape ecosystem. And majority of the things are similar, but they did change a few things, right? So their selections are very similar. So the things that they focus on is solo stuff. And it's so almost everything is, you are isolated, you are by yourself. So they are looking, so the themes of it is that they self-isolation, and there is zero feedback. You don't get any positive reinforcement. You don't get any negative enforcement. The only time that you hear words uttered out of the cadre's mouths is they are giving instructions once. As soon as they are done, you will not hear anything come outside of their mouth. They will stand there and just look at you. And if you ask them a single question, they will always respond with, "Candidate, what were your instructions?" That is it. If you do awesome, they won't say a word. They won't even move a face muscle. If you do anything wrong, not going to say anything, not going to move a single face muscle, right? I'm telling you, like, you get nothing, right? The only reason that you even know that you've passed is at the end of the final event, they're going to tell you, hey, and for both selections, the final event is a board. They're going to tell you, hey, we're going to take a chance on you. You get to go to the next step of evolution, which is OTC for both ISA, and because each one has their own OTC, which stands for Operator Training Course. The only reason you know that you failed is that when you go up, you're going to be randomly called whatever your pseudonyms are, right? It's slightly different between ISA and Delta. If you get told you're put into a truck, you're going to get in a truck probably by yourself, and then you're going to get taken off into a building. They're going to come in, you're going to walk in, and they're going to say, hey, you're done. You didn't make it. They won't tell you, you might have an idea of what you did. They're not really going to get too much into it. You failed a time standard or you did something else, but they're just basically going to tell you, hey, thank you for trying. Thank you for coming out, and good luck to you for the rest of your career. And that's it. And you're gone. Right. And because you're in pseudonyms, the rest of your class will never see you again. Right. Because for many different reasons. So their selection is typically 5 to 6 weeks, right? So you actually don't know when it's going to end. And there's a reason for that. That goes into sort of the mental, the stresses that because when they designed the selection, right, Charlie Beckwith, when he was creating Delta selection, brought in like psychologists, and they were like, this is what we need to find. What is the most psychologically stressful environment that we can come up with, right? And so instead of doing something like the Navy SEALs BUDS, they came up with this. And this quickly reaffirmed that this is way more psychologically stressful than the other options. So So the stress style, you are completely isolated, right? There is like one event for like 2 or 3 days, right? Or a couple days. It's slightly different between Delta and ISA, where you don't do anything with anybody else. You're completely isolated. It's solo the entire basically 5 to 6 weeks. You get no feedback, and because you are by yourself and you get no feedback, the level of uncertainty is through the roof because you don't know, right? At any one point, an instructor could be like, hey, come over here. You're basically in whisk you away and now you're done, right? Like that screws with people, right? So, and then it's mentally draining. It's very ambiguous. There is absolutely no clear path and extreme performance standards, which you don't know the performance standards. They just tell you whenever they tell you an event, especially if it's an endurance or physical event, they say, candidates, go as fast as you can, do the best that you can. And that's it, right? The only reason you know that you didn't pass the time standard is if you get kicked out. That's it, right? So that is a whole nother level of stress that unless you've went through it, like if you went through RASP or BUDS, it's a huge, stark difference. And it screws with people more than people think. It's actually probably there's a reason why they designed it like this. So what are they looking for, right? All tier 1 units, they are looking for probably the number one thing is problem solving. And not only but problem solving, but like self-confidence, self-reliance, because obviously in best case scenarios, right, you're in a small team, right? But even when you're in a small team, a lot of these teams get separated and you have to be able to operate independently. So they need you to be a problem solver and you to be extremely self-reliant and self-confident and initiative. But then also because you are the tip of the spear and you are allowed to make battlefield basically decisions on the fly, you have to have an extreme level of accountability. And you have to understand the weight of your decisions. And so the ability to operate independently, the ability to handle uncertainty, because like that's the operational environment, especially when you're at this tier level, you're out there. Like there's nobody else. Like you're not coming in behind anybody else. You're first one out. So that level of uncertainty is higher than anything because you're usually, especially if you're ISA guys, like you're the one who's gathering the intelligence. So you may not know what's going on at all. And because of this, all these different things, this level of reliance and problem solving, it requires a level of high intelligence, right? There's a lot of shooters out there, the tier 2 level that struggle with this, right? I'm not calling anybody dumb or retarded, but it definitely requires a level of intelligence. And what I think that I heard a quote the other day, I think some general or might have even Pete Hegseth or something like that, said that we basically need rocket scientists who can like shoot people, right? And honestly, that's what they're trying to look for, right? Obviously, we're not going to exactly find that, but that's what they're trying to go. They're trying to go through those extremely intelligent people who can shoot people, who can, perform violence when needed to, but also, maybe launch some rockets into space. So, your John Rambo meets Elon Musk. That's the dream. Are they going to get that? No, but you're going to try to get as close as you can. And then a big portion of this, which I think often gets overlooked, is a level of emotional control because stuff is going to happen. And the only thing that when stuff goes really, really bad, the only thing that can screw you more than whatever the situation is already doing to you is for you to lose your cool. And so emotional regulation and emotional control are vital to these situations because a lot of times you're going to be in like really bad situations because that's the nature of this particular job and this particular level of the special operations at the tier 1 level. So there's a lot of similarities. So both selections concentrate heavily on self-reliance. You are most completely solo for much of the process, and you get little to no feedback. You often do not know what you're doing. You don't know how long you're going to be doing for, and you have no idea when the next evolution of training is going to come because they surprise you every single time. So, because a lot of people rely on feedback to keep performing. In this selection, feedback never comes. All right. So before we go into the specifics, let's answer some questions. Army Aviation is riskier bet right now. No, seems like they got their priorities on US. Army Aviation, no, like as a matter of fact, there's helicopters are not going away anytime soon. Actually, the one good thing is helicopters. We are getting I forget what it's the MV-75 or H, whatever the new helicopter. It was the V2 Valor 280. What is it? The MV-75. That's going to replace the Black Hawk. It was supposed to replace the Apache too because it's modular. So the MV-75. So it's basically like an Osprey, like a more advanced version, but it's more, the Osprey is more of an airplane that has helicopter capabilities. This is more of a helicopter that has airplane capabilities, right? If that makes any sense. The problem with helicopters is they weren't meant to fly. So it's good that we're actually transitioning to tilt rotor aircraft, because I can tell you having more natural airplane characteristics is better for safety overall. If you understand aerodynamics and just physics, you'll understand why helicopters are so unsafe. Yes, helo to plane is much easier. So, like I said, like when you're actually learning how to fly a helicopter, you actually have to learn how to land it like an airplane, and that has to do with weight. Because when you're flying a helicopter, when you're using power, the most amount of power, the most strain that you're putting on your engines, like if you're pushing your engines to 100%, you use majority of your engine power during takeoff and landing and hovering. Like you'll be using like 90%. But when you're actually at altitude and you're cruising, you'll use like 20-30%. So let's just say that you lose an engine, you have now lost half your power. Well, if you have so much weight on you, you may no longer have enough power to go to a hover, because that requires more power. So what you have to learn how to do is land it like an airplane. So that's one of the reasons why that one, you already learned kind of like those processes, and also just flying a helicopter is just so much harder than an airplane. But you have to understand all the characteristics of physics and aerodynamics that go into learning how to fly an airplane, and that go into, but also into helicopter. But you have to know them even more because they're more critical in the flight profiles of rotary wing aircraft, if you will. Plus the fact that reserves got rid of all their copters. Yeah, I don't remember. I think it's just National Guard. Yeah. You did say you were Cadre at one point. How did you guys differentiate between choosing the best person and the right person? Currently applying for an SMU enabler. Sorry, just got on the live. Past the service. Yes. For anybody who doesn't know, I got to about 4 years into my time at ISA. I actually got to be a cadre at ISA, and still one of the coolest jobs I ever got to do at the unit. Like I got to do a lot of cool stuff, but being cadre at a tier 1 selection, cool as fuck. So what we are looking for, right? Like I said, we're looking at problem solvers, right? We're looking at people who are extremely self-reliant, self-confident, right? But you need adaptability. You need people who are like, we put you in the middle of some really crazy situations. Like you've seen all the movies and shows. The tier 1 selections, Delta and ISA, have some of the most unique events, especially ISA, because ISA actually added, like, for example, Delta is a little bit more physically demanding because they have the long walk, right? Also their selection is harder physically for 2 reasons. One, they do their ruck movements, especially their final movement, which is over 40 miles, is about 40 miles. Not only is it longer than ISA's, which is slightly shorter, it's in way worse terrain, right? And we're not going to tell you where ISA's selection is, but it's a completely different part of the country. And I know this because part of ISA's OTC, our tactical portion of our training, is actually in the location where at the exact place that Delta actually does their selection. So we actually have to run their land nav lanes that they run during selection. So I know this personally. It's the hardest land nav I've ever seen. If you've ever been in the brambles of West Virginia, and I know some people are like, oh, you're giving away. No, you can look up on Google where Delta's selection is. It's the fact that they have to move much longer distance. They have to move longer distance, but they have to do it in way worse terrain. Definitely makes their selection harder from a physical standpoint of view. The ours, we added a couple very unique events that are extremely psychologically and intellectually harder, right? So if I had to say it, right, Delta's a little bit more is physically more challenging. ISA's is probably some more intellectually challenging, if you will. But both of them are very, very similar. So going back to the question about me being Cadre. So you get put into these situations where and then actually I'll lead this into it. You're gonna get put into no-win situations, right? And I'm not gonna get into any like what they are specifically, just know they are no-win situations. Basically, you're gonna be put in a situation where they're gonna want you to analyze what's going on. You then need to make a decision based off the information that you get. You need to make the best case decision based off of what you see in front of you, and you have to do it in a timely way because you can't sit there and analyze forever. You then have to make a decision, but I can tell you, every decision that you make, it's wrong, right? So what they're looking for, right, is one, how quickly can you analyze the situation? So they're going to evaluate that. Then they're going to evaluate what decision you ended up making, because there is no right decision. They're all wrong. Why you evaluated, why you ended up making that decision. And then, and this is the most important part that screws everybody up, whatever decision you make, follow it through. Don't question it, right? Because where people get messed up and where we really get people is once you put them in basically like, oh, you've made the wrong decision, they will go back. Even though they believe that they know that it's wrong, they will go back on it. So, and these are really, really hard situations. So that is also testing another level of your confidence, your mental fortitude, right? And like because that, and you have to think about it, like, why is it doing like this, right? Because you're going to be, especially like at the tier, where you're in situations where you're going to be in a situation where no matter what situation you get, you make a decision. Like, let's just say that you're caught behind enemy lines, you're ambushed, you're surrounded, your cover has been blown, right? When you're in these battle situations, every decision you make is going to be a bad one, right? Every decision is probably going to have negative consequences, but you still have to make a decision. And so it puts you in these type of situations to see what you would do, even if every situation is bad. Which one do you believe is the least bad, or which one that has the least amount of consequences? So this allows them to evaluate something that probably no other selection allows them to evaluate. It's probably one of the most unique portions of it. And then it ends with a board, and these are constantly known as hostile boards or murder boards. These are not nice boards. These are not like your boards that you go for in the military when you're getting promoted. They are nothing like that. All right. They are, and I know that some of you may not think that, like, oh, that doesn't sound that bad. Trust me, it's way worse than you ever think it is. To the point where I actually thought my hostile board was the hardest event at selection. That's how bad it was. All right. Let's do some questions. How good is IS-8 human and undercover ops? What's the difference between Ground Branch and 18 Fox? Well, I wouldn't even really put 18 Fox in the same category, right? Because 18 Fox is doing human from an SF level type of mission. They're not really doing things clandestine. The closest, not doing things clandestine or covertly. They're not really going on operations and civilian. They're doing it in whatever capacity that their SF team is operating in. Right. The closer um, organizations who would probably be doing something similar is either your guys at Delta in the intelligence squadron or your ground branch. Right. So your ground branch, with it is a CIA. It's their paramilitary, kind of like when people think of like the CIA Black Ops. That's basically what people think is like that's ground branch, right? Um, they're they're probably very similar but the difference is the authorities, because the CIA, the ISA still falls under the authorities of the Department of Defense. The CIA does not, right? They fall under their own authorities. So this has been used before, actually, to our advantage. When actually the ISA rebuilt its relationship with the CIA, they actually started doing operations with the CIA because we had different authorities, and we would actually use each other to actually get around each other's limit of their authorities, right? If there was something that they couldn't do, there was a chance that we might be able to do it because our authorities allowed us, versus and vice versa. So we actually ended up being because one, we're sort of designed after them anyways, and we're actually kind of very similar to way that, not exactly, but it's different, but it's probably closest to ground branch, if you will. And so a lot of people, especially the guys who are in the tactical detachment of ISA, a lot of them would end up going to ground branch. This is actually a pretty easy transition.